I think we're live. So I called this one Accessibility Newbie to Ninja because I think the last time I was here was last year, and I presented accessibility basics, and it was all about how to get started in accessibility.
Could you speak a little more loudly, please? I am
Sure.
deaf.
Okay, I'll try. I've been a little bit sick, so I'll try and project more. So that was all about the nitty-gritty of WCAG and Section 508 and the ADA and how you can get sued and how to not get sued, how to test. So it was very sort of technical as far as that gets. But so a year later, I thought, well, what should I do next? And so I just sort of thought I would talk about how I've tried to progress in the last year from where I was a year ago. Because accessibility is kind of a, it can be a sort of a big field. It's easy to feel very puny and overwhelmed in the face of these huge issues that come from accessibility. And so this is basically my 10-step program for moving past the basics of accessibility. I do have a little one-page PDF that one of our artists has worked up with the 10 points on it and a few notes on each one. So at the end, I'll put a little QR code up there and a bit link. So if you start napping partway through, you won't miss all the points. Okay, so it's not a technical talk today. It's really very much sort of a personal talk. So feel free to jump in if you have things to say. So point number 1, ask questions. Seems sort of basic, but it actually can feel kind of scary. There are some forums out there that have a lot of cred. I don't know what your experience has been with forums in general, but I usually find that they can be sort of nasty, and people troll each other and make fun of each other. So to think of trying to ask a question as a sort of a relatively new practitioner can be a little bit scary. But there are a couple of really great forums that deal specifically with accessibility that are available. I found the WebAIM forum to be fantastic. And if you join the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, you have access to their Connections forum. And I kind of like that sometimes when I want to pose a question and I maybe don't want the whole world to see it, because anyone in the world can join the WebAIM forum. Their whole archives are up on the web. In a sense, it casts a broader net, but the IAAP forum is a little bit more focused. And they both have a lot of really amazing people on them. And one of the things that's been great about the accessibility community is that people are just really passionate about it. And they dig in, and they're really eager to help. And a couple months ago, there was somebody posting a question on the IAAP forum saying, is there a place where I can can people send me to places where I can ask some really basic questions? And everybody said, you can ask them here. And he says, no, I don't want to bother everybody with my really basic questions. And then, no, really, ask them here. We're here to help. So it's very inclusive. Everybody, even the really, really expert people, don't agree on everything, and it can be fascinating and kind of frightening to watch them go back and forth, because there's a lot of really, really technical stuff, and you can really get bogged down in this stuff. And seeing some of the absolutely top-notch people in the field sort of have to pick apart some of these points and still not reach a clear solution, it's humbling, but it's also great to know that all of those people are out there and they're willing to help. So get over that stage fright and ask your questions. Number 2, start writing. Not a real natural speaker. I'm here, but it's not my favorite place to be. I do a little bit better with writing, and what I found that writing is a really great way to sort of help me consolidate information. There's nothing like having to put what you know into a concise format and organize it into logical points and just sort of make it very concise and then expand it back out again. And it really has been helpful for me to write things down, and it helps to clear the fog a little bit. And then if you have a place where you can post your ramblings or whatever you're writing on the internet, it can be really handy to have a place where you can go back to find that stuff again. So if a topic comes up and you say, oh, I wrote something about that once, and you can go back, and that can be, you can find that summary again and remember that, oh yeah, I did know this thing once and I'd forgotten about that. So that can be a really helpful thing. Number 3, make your own audit template. So a lot of the work that you would do as an accessibility practitioner would be auditing people's sites. There are a ton of audit templates out there, no doubt. And this is really more about owning your own process, because a lot of those templates will cover every single aspect of the WCAG, because that's what you're going to do if you're publishing your template. So that's a great place to start, but you may find that you like different parts of the different templates. This lets you own your own process, because you know the way you work better than anyone else, and you know the kind of work that your company does better than anyone else. So one example that I have is we don't really do a lot of work that has forms. If our clients have forms, they use something else. So we're not coding forms a lot. So that kind of stuff is not as important to me. So having a template that just kind of focuses on the stuff that I need to look at in depth is a big time saver. Another thing that's helpful is being able to put your audit results in a consistent format. So if you're going to create a list of issues that require follow-up, it can be helpful for the people you're working with to do that in a somewhat consistent fashion. So it makes it easier to work through those issues. Number 4, make a short list of your favorite tools. When I got started, I was finding so many resources everywhere. Color contrast tools. It's got to be 50 of them. And I've got them all bookmarked and listed somewhere. But then when someone says, hey, can we analyze this one? I'm like, oh no, I've got 50 of them. And they're not all good. They're not all good for all things. So I found that it has been really helpful to me to just sort of cut through it all and pick out the 3 or 5 color contrast tools that I find solve most of my problems. And I found that there's different ways to organize this, and everyone's going to have their own way that works better for them. Probably try a few different ways. The things that I've ended up with are some sort of curated browser bookmarks. And I also have a Confluence page where I have a lot of this information, and that is more annotated. So that is easier to share with other people. I have some screenshots, and it helps to remember what this one looks like when it's loaded up. And I also use a desktop note-taking app. The one that I use is called Notational Velocity. It's a Mac app. But I know a lot of people like Google Keep or something like Evernote where you can clip stuff. But if you can just kind of get your list down to your top 10 or 15 things, then if you still don't have your solution from those things, you can go afar. But I think that this really helps me to get going on a task much more quickly. And it also kind of ties a little bit back to the writing strategy. If you have a Confluence space with some annotation, that process of doing that can really help you to organize your thoughts. Next, engage with your coworkers. Okay, your coworkers probably don't think about accessibility as much.
Excuse me, calendar app needs your attention.
Whoa, I guess it does. It certainly has it.
Definitely worked.
It has my attention. Okay.
Excuse me.
That's true. I probably have more things open than I need to have open. So where was I? Yeah, your coworkers aren't thinking about this nearly as much as you are. So finding a way to help your coworkers think about this a little bit more can be really helpful. And it can be a way to help your whole organization achieve its accessibility goals and to learn how to think in a more inclusive way. So what I did was I put a meeting out on the schedule, I made it optional, and I made it short. So this is one that has been a little bit challenging. For a while, it was helping to get some engagement, and I feel like that has sort of faded out. So I think what is going to work in this way is going to have a lot to do with your own company culture. Like I said, it seems like it should be easy because unlike those forums where you're supposed to ask the questions where those people are experts and they're kind of scary, these are people you already know, so they're probably not very scary, except for the fact that they often tend to think that I am more of an expert than I tend to think of myself as being. But trying to get everybody involved in thinking about accessibility is something that will sort of help the company along, and it can also help you to sort of expand your knowledge as well. It can be hard to figure out. One of the reasons why I think this gets difficult sometimes is it's hard to figure out what people's roles are. The most recent meeting that I had where I had some really good participation was a lot of fun because I was working on writing something, and I was trying to categorize accessibility activities sort of by role. There's content, there's design, there's development, and I had my thoughts about where each thing fell, but I thought it would be good to get feedback from the people who are in those roles on where they thought it would be. So that was a good discussion, and it was helpful for everybody, and I think it was really great for people in all of those roles to interact with each other and talk about where they thought their sort of responsibilities lie for accessibility. Sometimes people think that something isn't their role, but other people do. So getting that conversation going can be really helpful. So what do people think their roles are? What do people think your role is? I've been surprised sometimes by what people thought my role was. So having those conversations can be really helpful. Do the same thing with your clients. Your clients also are not thinking about accessibility anywhere near as much as you are. So you can help them out by including information and resources in your client documentation. And this is something I've only recently started doing because I have had the experience a couple times of seeing a site post-launch and thinking, boy, the accessibility rating of this was a whole lot better before they started adding their own content. So I felt like I had to take a little bit of responsibility for that because I didn't give them the information they needed to keep it in good shape. So if you have a client who's doing a lot of video content, you can give them the information they need about how to add transcripts, about putting tags on the iframes, things like that. I've started including just as sort of basic background information, tips on adding link text that's meaningful, or adding how to add alt text to their images and why, and links to resources that help them figure out what is relevant alt text. So at the risk of sounding slightly cynical, I think I found that a lot of people really want to have an accessible website. They have an RFP that says the website has to meet accessibility criteria. But sometimes not always, but sometimes they think that that's somebody else's job. And that's your job as the contractor. You need to hand them a website that's accessible. And they don't full on realize that it's not a once and done activity. So the weeks leading up to a website launch may not be the greatest teaching moment for a lot of people. They have a lot to think about. They're probably maybe stressed out about their content. So, and the content is so important as far as accessibility. So I think that just having that information in a resource that they can refer back to and letting them know that they can, ask you for help on that or reach out to you, hopefully will help make the web a better place for all of us. Get a certification and keep on learning. So I am a IAAP CPACC with Certified Professional and Accessibility Core Competencies. There are also certifications that are more relevant for people who do primarily development work. And I would have to say that studying for that certification was a fabulous way to learn way more about accessibility than I knew before. So in addition to getting the letters after your name and the logo after your signature and obviously the admiration of all of your peers, I think that it just opened my eyes to whole different facets of accessibility that I really hadn't thought about, because I too was really thinking of accessibility as primarily a technical field, and it really opened my eyes to a lot more of the layers of accessibility. So if you sort of take this and then refer back to number 5 and number 6, by the time you've done getting this certification, you've kind of gone through a little bit of a transformation, and you've internalized a lot of stuff, and your coworkers and your clients haven't been through that yet. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the DeQ University classes. That's one of the tools that I use to study for the CPA-CC, and as well as studying their, the BOK is their body of knowledge. It has so many links. You could probably spend months just going through all of that material, but there's a great online conference called Inclusive Design 24. There are many podcasts and webinars, and a lot of conferences post their presentations on the web. So there are just tons of ways to keep learning once you get started. So that is another one. Follow people on social media. So just as a preface, I pretty much hate social media in general. I almost stopped doing web work because when I started studying the web, I realized that this is all just a way to get people to follow each other on social media. But anyway, it does sort of have a lot of value. And there's a real risk of distraction. I myself am an ADD person, so the last thing I need is more invitations to distraction. So I kind of limit myself to Twitter and just a tiny bit of LinkedIn. The accessibility Slack channel is a fabulous resource, and there's way too much there for me to keep up with. So the people that I follow on Twitter, I have a separate account that is just for my accessibility stuff, and I only follow people who are active in accessibility. And you know, sometimes I will just check in quickly every morning and see what has changed, what has come in. Sometimes I only get to check every couple of weeks. Sometimes it'll be a month or two before I get to check in. And sometimes it's a quick in and out. And then there are the days that I check in and I really get sucked into something because somebody's posted an article that really captures my attention, and that links to more. So there's a little danger there of going down the rabbit hole. But a lot of those really smart people that you are following in number 1 are also posting on Twitter about what they're thinking about and what they're writing, and it's a really good way to keep track of sort of what's current on the web. This is another one where, so this information is linked on the PDF that I'm sending, but the last item here actually is not on the PDF because it's sort of newish, but I did put a bit link in there. In recognition of International Women's Day, Carrie Fisher from DeQ posted a tool that will actually analyze your Twitter follower and following lists and attempt to estimate the percentages of men, women, and non-binary people in your list. And you know, a lot of people in response posted their own percentages and recognized that they're following a lot more men in the tech field than women. So Carrie posted a tool. She posted a link to that tool, and she also posted her own list of great tech women to follow. So if you want to look that up, it has in that thread, there's a link to that tool, and there's also a list of the women that she is suggesting. The accessibility project list of who to follow is pretty long, so if that's too many, I found another site that has a top 10 list, and that is probably a great way to just get you started. Go to an accessibility conference. I think I said earlier I'm not a big conference goer, but you might just learn more in 2 days than you might in a month of a couple months of following people on Twitter. Another great thing is that you get to meet some of the people that you have been following and reading about or reading things from. In the fall last year, I went to Accessibility Toronto, met a lot of great people, and not only did I do a lot of really fun networking, but the talks, obviously, and the topics were great. I listened to talks about things that I never really thought about. I'm not a gamer, but I learned a lot about accessibility and gaming and why it actually is important. It's not just fun and games. It has a lot to do with social interactions and people breaking out of stereotypes. And just the way the room was set up was fascinating to see. They had people doing sign language. They had live captioning, and it was just a real great example of how to make a conference that's really accessible to a wide variety of people. And then finally, have fun. And here's where I guess I can get a little dark, but I hope to end on a positive note. I want to say that accessibility, it really is hard. In some ways, it's easy because all you have to do is, most of the problems out on the web can be solved if you just check your color contrast, include your alt text, provide meaningful link text, make sure your heading structure makes sense. So those aren't so easy. So a lot of these things are very conceptually simple, but in practice they're more complicated. Alt text has been written about so much, and it is always in everyone's top 2 or 3 list of errors that they find on the web. Same thing with link text. Heading structures should make sense, logical order. It's so hard to do it well because we are visual creatures, and they're the way our style sheets are usually set up tend to encourage people to use style sheets for visual presentation rather than structure. So in a lot of ways it's easy, but it's also hard. It's not just a technical topic, it's really a people topic. And in order to build a web that's going to be truly accessible to the whole world, people really need to change the way they think about building the web. And like I said, we are visual creatures, and convincing people to change the way they think is not easy. Changing the way you think is not easy even if you want to. And if people are not sure that they really want to change the way they think, it's even harder. So if you are cast in the role of being an accessibility evangelist, you can feel a little challenged if you're like, I'm not a particularly charismatic person, so being this evangelist is not my happy place to be, but I do try and reach out and get people engaged in accessibility. There's recently an article that came out on the WebAIM site, and they do a screen reader survey every year or two. But recently they published an analysis of the top 1 million websites. And what they did was they ran the home pages of this top 1 million sites through the Wave API, and they aggregated the results to see, sort of just to give the broad internet an accessibility score. I think they found that 98% of the sites had at least one WCAG failure on their homepage. And after that came out, one of the favorite people that I follow, named Eric Bailey, he wrote a post on his personal site, and his article describing his reaction to that was called Fighting Uphill. And one of the statements that he makes in it was something that really resonated with me. He said, "Spend some time conducting a manual website accessibility audit. It oftentimes feels like a tedious, frustrating, thankless experience that firmly paints you as the enemy for people who just want to move fast and break things." So it is easy to sort of fall into that. So I think it's really important to just always try and find ways to keep it fun. So, we have a Slack channel where I work, and every time I get excited about something, I'll just post something on the Slack channel. And, I get excited about some of the nerdiest things. And I just throw it out there. People might think I'm weird, people might think it's funny, people might think it's interesting, but I just throw it out there, and that's sort of one of the things that helps me to kind of keep it fresh and keep it fun. So that was my top 10, and of course there can be 11 and 12 and 13 and 14. The list goes on, but we don't have, I don't want to go all day. I mean, there are plenty of additional things. I mean, my list is I would like to keep working on my screen reader skills. I'd like to learn another screen reader. I just use the Mac VoiceOver, and I know that that is not the most widely used screen reader. I'd like to be better at my skills on the iPhone screen reader. I would love to learn more about voice activation and what sort of challenges are faced by people using that kind of technology. So anyway, you could the list of ideas can go on and on. Yeah. So the journey never ends, I guess, is the final. So you may not be a ninja yet, but that's okay. Just do your best and just try to be awesome. And if you're interested in the PDF with our artist Molly Taif's beautiful illustrations, you can scan that code or hit that bit link. And I think that's all I have. Are there any questions? Does anyone want to offer any other number 11, number 12, number 13 to add to the list? Great strategies that you found to help yourself keep going. Well, I thank you for sticking it out. I hope you. Oh, yes.
I do have a question
Yep.
for you, more about your, when you were talking about trying to get your coworkers involved and engaged. And you said in the beginning it seemed to go well. So in your experience, what has been the most compelling story, I guess, you've told that has engaged your technical coworkers in seeing the value and the importance of what you're doing?
So my approach was to kind of put up an announcement and say, and sort of tell people that, like, I don't really have a clear sense of what people are interested in. So, I put things out, some of them in my accessibility Slack channel, some of them get reactions, some of them don't. I don't know if I'm posting about things that people already know or people maybe aren't really interested in. So I threw out a couple of ideas and I said, here's a chance, why don't we just get together and talk about, anything you might have come across in the past week that where you fixed an accessibility problem, where you came across an accessibility problem you couldn't solve, whether you were pretty proud of something that you did, in accessibility, whether somebody else raised a question that you couldn't answer, just, anything. And I also did include a few links about things that are articles that I'd found that were very sort of developer-centric, because I didn't know if people were interested in these topics or not. So I thought, let's look at these things and see if they look interesting or not. Are these tools that we can use? Are these not of interest to us? If they're not, how come? How can we use some of these patterns? Are they not really useful to us? So we hit a few of those things. Some of our creative people came and gave some thoughts about some of the articles. And then there was the conversation that I had where I was looking for some input on my thoughts about how to arrange things. I think trying to come up with, I don't feel like I can necessarily tell people what they need to learn, because I really don't know how much people already know. So I was kind of hoping to get people to come out with their thoughts and ideas. I'm still trying to come up with a new strategy. I know that I work for a place where meetings are not popular, so it's kind of hard to get people to come to a meeting. So, I am still working on that one.
You're wrestling with it still.
I am, yeah. I haven't given up, but I'm not sure that my first approach was really the right one, so I'm mulling.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. So thank you all for sticking it out to the very end of the Nerd Summit.